Namaskar. My dear friends, I am Sanjay Mansukhani, a teacher of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, addressing you from Kolkata. Today, we are going to talk on the basics of practicing yoga. Patanjali said, yoga is nothing but chitta vritti nirodha. That means one needs to control the vrittis of the mind. And he, in his 12th sutra of the Samadhi Pada, states that the vrittis, the states of the mind, can be stilled by practice and dispassion. The mind, we know, is very, very fickle and is very difficult to control. Therefore, in the Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, "O Arjuna, the mind can be controlled by abhyasa and vairagya." Now, these two mean practice and dispassion. The same two have been mentioned by Patanjali also. You see, it is very important to understand first how does the mind work in the normal circumstances. Vyasa, one of the major commentators of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, says, the stream of the chitta, the stream of the mind, can flow in two ways, in two directions. It can either uplift the individual or it can bring him towards its downfall. He connects the mind to a river. He says a river normally flows down the channels of the senses towards their objects and into the sea of samsara, the cycle of birth and death. We see the outward bound. It flows out into the world outside, the world of sense objects. And the world of sense objects outside is a temporary world. It's a world of birth and death. So he says, normal circumstances, this is what happens. But if we are able to check our mind, if we are able to reverse the flow of the mind by the power of the discrimination, then this river of the mind flows back, flows towards the inner self. Now it is free from samsara, free from the world outside, and it helps in the realization of the self. We are able to understand our true self. And when we are able to flow along with the power of discrimination, then this mind of ours leads to upliftment and ultimately liberation. And if we allow the mind to flow without any discrimination, then it automatically, naturally plunges in the quality of life. Therefore, my dear friends, when the mind is allowed to run on its own, it runs towards sensual pleasures. It produces karma. And this karma may be good or may be bad. If it is good karma, then it automatically leads to the upliftment of ourselves. And if it is bad karma, it pushes us further down. Now, what do we mean here by practice and dispassion? These are the two methods. By practice and dispassion, we can turn our mind inwards. We can free our mind from the bad things of life, from vice. We can drastically diminish the negativities in us. And this can be done only by practice of yoga. The flow of the mind is then moved towards higher knowledge. And this flow becomes unobstructed. And the mind becomes immersed in discrimination. Another way of understanding this is that the gunas, the three gunas of Prakriti, which are always present, are three in nature: Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Now, out of these, the objective is to maximize Sattva, to enhance Sattva, and to minimize and diminish Rajas and Tamas. So discrimination is called Viveka. Dispassion is called Vairagya. And practice is called Abhyas. So when we do these three, we are able to realize the truth which is inherent in us, and the truth which is inherent in us, is essentially sattvic in nature, but it might get overwhelmed by rajas and tamas. And when it gets overwhelmed by rajas and tamas, then the inner light gets diminished. Then the inner light of the Purusha gets covered by tamas and rajas. And then we find that it becomes difficult for us. Therefore, the purpose of all practice, the purpose of all dispassion, and the purpose of all discrimination is to only enhance sattva and to reduce, diminish our rajasic and tamasic tendencies, to control them. And when we are able to do this, then we automatically find the fluctuating states of the mind get reduced, get controlled, get diminished, and in fact they stop. And when the fluctuation of the mind stop because of a tremendous enhancement of sattva in us, that is the time when we find that we are moving very fast towards liberation. That is the time when we find that we are moving very fast towards higher knowledge. That is the time when we start acquiring higher and higher powers. Now, what exactly is abhyas? What exactly is practice? So Patanjali defines it in the 13th chapter, in the 13th sutra of the first chapter. He says, practice, abhyas, is something very simple, very essential to human nature. That is, to concentrate the mind, to bring it to one place. Our mind by itself, by its inherent nature, has a tendency to be at 100 places at a single point of time. It keeps on jumping around like a monkey. So this monkey mind of ours has to be stabilized, has to be brought to one point. Therefore, Patanjali has defined abhyas, practice, as the effort. It requires effort to concentrate the mind. And Vyasa, as I told you before, was a prominent commentator of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. He defines concentration, one-pointedness, as the peaceful flow of the mind. Mind is flowing peacefully and it is free from all fluctuating states or vrittis. So the mind is steady, the mind is calm, the mind is composed. This is what happens when we are doing abhyasa, when we are concentrating the mind, and the practice is to secure this state of steadiness. It is important to realize that a steady mind will not come about by itself. It will only come about by practice, by effort, and that effort is required. One remembers here a comment from Arjuna. Arjuna, who was a warrior, was actually not hardcore trained in yoga. So he says the mind is harder to control than the wind, and it is fickle, powerful, and obstinate. We all know that. We know the behavior of the mind. We know how the mind jumps around. The mind is a monkey. But Krishna assures him that without doubt, this fickle mind, this monkey mind, is hard to control, but it is only with practice and with dispassion that we can control it. And Patanjali further says this practice requires effort, and this effort has to come about with enthusiasm and vigor. Also, the term sadhana by Vyasa here, sadhana refers to either one's daily spiritual practices, or sadhana can also refer in connection to a sadhak and a siddhi. If you have a goal, a spiritual goal, a material goal, a mental goal, then that goal requires a process of practice. And that process of practice is called sadhana. And the person who is doing that process of practice is the sadhak. So all abhyas is actually a sadhana. It is to bring your mind on one process and move it in that direction till the mind becomes regulated, focused, and reaches the end goal. It is only when the mind reaches the end goal that we actually manifest it in the spiritual world, in the mental world, and in the physical world. Now the mind can only flow peacefully, as we saw a bit earlier, when the rajasic element in the mind and the tamasic element in the mind have been stilled. Where do these rajas and tamas come from in the mind? They come in through our sense organs. You must remember our eyes are constantly picking up images from the outer world. Our ears are constantly picking up sounds from the outer world. Now, these images from the outer world are tamasic in nature. The sounds from the outer world are tamasic in nature. They have a form. Anything which has a form is tamasic. And there is also rajas because they keep on changing, they keep on oscillating, they keep on moving. So these constant imagery and their movements is what causes unstillness, jumpiness, the monkiness of the mind. Because the mind reflects what it sees, the mind reflects what it hears, and the mind behaves accordingly. Therefore, my dear friends, it is only by calming down, by removing the rajasic and the tamasic tendencies of the mind, can the mind become sattvic, can the mind become pure. And only when the mind becomes pure, it becomes steady, it becomes still, it becomes constant. And that is when it moves towards higher knowledge. It starts moving inwards. Moving further to Sutra 14 of the first chapter, Patanjali says practice needs to be firmly established because it has to be cultivated without interruption, and it has to be done with a devotion, and that too for a long period of time. Now, why is this needed? For the very simple reason that a mind is such that it requires time to change, it requires time to pick up new habits, and unless and until we cultivate the mind for a longer duration, then only the mind starts showing a change. And only when we do it without interruption can that change become a long-term change, or else that change will not be a long-term change. It will be a short-term change. It will jump back to its original position. There has to be no break in the practice, in the abhyasa. And devotion is a must. Now, why is devotion a must? Because with bhakti, with emotion, the feeling, the vrittis are formed faster for the abhyas. Vrittis are formed faster for the nirodha, because the objective of abhyas is to nirodha the vrittis. So when we are doing abhyas with devotion, with enthusiasm, with commitment, with bhakti, then we find that the nirodha sanskaras in us are formed very fast. And this is what helps us in controlling the vrittis. Therefore, my dear friends, I will just reiterate first, for the practice to become unshakable, it must be performed nirantara, without interruption. One cannot take a break in the practice. It is not advisable to take break in the practice. And the goal of the yoga is to precisely quell our whimsical actions. So when we are putting it under constant pressure of constant practice, then the whimsicalness of the mind starts moving away. Second, it must be for a dirgha kala. Dirgha kala means the practice must be for a long time. You cannot bring about any change in the mind in a short span of time. It requires a long time. And as the Bhagavad Gita says, this requires yatna. Yatna means effort, and not effort in one life. It may require effort across many lives, because we have to clear a lot of impurities. These impurities could be any kind, but broadly rajasic impurities and tamasic impurities. And these impurities may have been collected over several lives as per yoga. And therefore, if one has to attain the supreme destination of cleaning up the entire rajas and tamas inside us and becoming 100% rajasic, then it takes time. It might take several lives also. Vyasa further states that yoga becomes successful. Yoga essentially is practice. You must remember that. that yoga is firmly established and becomes successful when there is austerity. Austerity means tapas. When there is celibacy, celibacy means brahmacharya. When there is knowledge, knowledge is astha. Knowledge is gyan. And when there is faith, faith is astha. So under these conditions, when you bring in these emotions in place, these activities in place, then the practice is sure shot. And then the practice starts bringing results. So the basic objective is to bring the mind to a sattvic state, which is its natural state. In the sattvic state, the mind is tranquil, the mind is calm, but often, as the nature of the mind is, it is fluctuating, so it might get overwhelmed by rajas and tamas. But somehow, if one is able to maintain the practice, then we find that we can remove rajas and tamas with steadfast and concentrated practice. And then we also find the mind becomes calm and composed again. And this practice needs to be done uninterruptedly with devotion for a long period of time. One good example given by one of the authors is you can consider the chitta like a garden. And this garden of chitta, you consider again sattva as a number of beautiful flowers planted in the garden. Now the garden is looking beautiful with these flowers of sattva, with these flowers representing goodness, light, luminance, and all the positivity in life, all the divinity in life. But suddenly you find there are weeds in the garden. These weeds in the garden are like rajas and tamas. They just sprout up. And when you have a gardener and he constantly is working in the garden and he removes these weeds, then only these flowers retain their beautiful look, the clean look. But these weeds can come any day, any time. The moment the gardener stops tendering to the garden, within a few days, we will find these weeds are back there again. So the commentators say these seeds of weeds are always present there in the soil. They can be considered as sanskaras. These sanskaras are always present as seeds in the subconscious mind. And whenever the opportunity comes, they start sprouting up. They start taking the nutrition away from the flower plants. They start giving a dirty, impure look to the garden. Similarly with our mind is naturally a place of beauty, naturally a place of sattva. But these rajas and tamas weeds keep on sprouting up. And we, like a good gardener, with practice, with abhyas, with the constant devotion, constant uninterrupted work in the garden, we have to keep on removing the weeds. And that is what is yoga. So Patanjali says, as long as we have a body, we will find that these sanskaras and the seeds are present in us. They will be latent. Therefore, they have a potential to become weeds whenever the right time comes, whenever the right place is reached, whenever the right birth is reached. And they are always there in our chitta. So it is very important that the practice of yoga is never stopped. It is always continued. And as long as we continue the practice of yoga, we will find that the sattva element is constantly being increased. We will find a sense of goodness and lightness in us. We will find that we are generating good karma, and we will find we are generating good vrittis and correspondingly good sanskaras. And as we keep on doing this, we will be moving slowly and steadily towards liberation. We will find that the new karmas are being good karmas. They are not creating bad sanskaras in us. They are creating good sanskaras in us. And when we practice the Ishvara Pranidhana, when we are in love with Ishvara, when we are committed to Ishvara, and when we do the chanting of Om, then we are constantly inputting on a daily basis more and more sattva in us. So as we keep on pumping in more and more sattva in us through Ishvara Pranidhana, through dedication to Ishvara, through commitment to Ishvara, through bhakti and surrender to Ishvara, and through Om chanting and through good acts as given in the Ashtanga Yoga, the acts of Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayam, Pratihara, Dharana, Dhyan, and Samadhi. These are ways and means by which we increase the sattva inside us, and these are the ways and means by which the sattva, once increased, leads to yoga, leads to liberation, leads to higher knowledge, leads to higher and higher states of existence. Coming to dispassion, since we have discussed a lot about practice and abhyasa, dispassion is a consciousness where we do not have a craving for the sense objects. Now, the world outside is a world of sense objects. They appeal to our senses, they attract our senses, they give pain and pleasure to our senses. So he says, what is dispassion? What is vairagya? Vairagya is when you are not attracted to the sense objects. And in another way, you can say vairagya. Actually, the term vairagya is made up of two words, vai and raga. Raga is color, vai is beyond color. So there is no liking for any one particular color. You are independent of liking a color. You are therefore free of your binding to liking a color. And this is dispassion. There is no passion for a particular color. So he says, color here represents a particular object, a particular sense object. When we are free from our passion, from our attachment, from our craving for sense objects, then we are in a state of vairagya. That does not mean you don't have the sense object. You have the sense object, but you don't have a craving for it. And these objects can be either actually out there, or they could have been mentioned in the scriptures, because you see the Vedas speak about the celestial realms. They speak about the celestial objects which are highly attractive, which have a tendency to pull man to aspire for those objects, and they can develop a passion for those objects. So he says this dispassion, this non-cravingness can be for both sense objects of this world and sense objects which are not of this world, which are beyond this world. Another way Vyasa explains it is, he says, you can have an attraction for members, you can have a craving for members of the opposite sex, for food, for drinks, for power. It could be any such thing. And he also says this dispassion should just not be for the attachment part of it. You must also be able to reject what it essentially means is, if you do not have an attachment, that is fine, but do not have an aversion also. Do not hate those objects. Do not run away from those objects. You must be balanced with those objects. You must not be attracted or averse to those objects. You must maintain an equidistance from those objects. And that is the way vairagya is defined. So real detachment is indifference to sense objects, whether they are present or they are absent. One must be free from them. And what one needs to do is, we must be in control of our mind. And our mind must not be in control of us. That is the biggest problem we people face. Even though it is our mind, even though it is my mind, I become a slave of the mind. The mind starts ruling over me. And when the mind starts ruling over me, when I become a slave, when I am forced to do what the mind wants me to do, that is the time when attraction comes in. That is the time when aversion to particular objects may come in. That is why it is very, very important that we hold our power over our mind. And we always remember, we are the masters of our mind, and the mind is not our master. So how do you bring the mind under control? To bring the lower under control with the higher power. Now the higher power here is the ego, With the ego, you can control the mind. And how do you control the ego? The ego can be controlled with the intellect, with the buddhi. So this is the order in which they are controlled. The buddhi controls the ahankara or the ego. The ahankara controls the manas or the mind. So whenever there is a wrong behavior on the mind's part, then you need to immediately realize it, understand it using your intellect. And then either you as an intellect must convince the mind or order the mind through the ego to behave as you want it to behave and not behave in a matter which is not to your liking or which is taking your life downhill and not uphill. The purpose of yoga is to travel uphill. The purpose of yoga is to go within. The purpose of yoga is to reach out to the self, go deep, deep, deep inside. But if we are finding that we are attracted to the world outside, if we are finding we are attracted to the sense objects outside, then that is a problem area, because all pain and sorrow are present in the world outside. All temporariness is out there in the world outside, and the birth and death happen in the world outside. So the purpose of yoga is to move to the inside, to move to the higher, to move to the sattva, to move to the pure part of the mind, and not be pulled out into the mind which is full of rajas and tamas, but to reach and be in a state of mind which is free from them all. So that is the biggest goal of mind. Now what the Gita says, that when we are detached from the external control of the senses, and the senses are disconnected from the objects, then we find there is happiness. There is happiness in the Atman, there is happiness in the soul. And such a person who is practicing is practicing the yoga of the absolute truth, and he experiences eternal happiness. But if you are looking after material pleasures, then these material pleasures are definitely out there in the world outside. And to connect to those materials, you have to use your senses. And this happiness you might get from the materials outside. They have a beginning, they have an end. And that is where this happiness is temporary. That is where this happiness is not lasting. And once this happiness finishes, then you are mired in sorrow. So you keep on fluctuating between happiness and sorrow when you are trying to take happiness from the materials outside. But when you bring your mind inside, focus it on the Atman, focus it on the Purusha, you experience eternal happiness. You experience happiness of the highest order. And this is what we must do. Now, Vijnana Bhikshu, another commentator, says, detachment can be in various stages. That is very interesting. He says, first you begin by making an effort to start detachment. And once when you start making an effort, then it starts giving you detachment over a certain number of objects. And then you continue with your detachment. And then you reach detachment to particularly all number of objects. And once that comes in, when your detachment has come in for all the objects in the world outside, then you begin your detachment in the world inside, in the mental world. You start detaching from things like honor, from things like ego, from things like pride, respect. So when you detach yourself from these inner things, then you reach the higher states of detachment. And that is what one must keep on doing. So detachment begins in stages. First you begin with the effort of detachment, then you bring with detachment to one or two objects, then you keep on increasing it till you reach all objects, then you start working on the inner mind and you start removing one particular quality in you which is not so positive, and then you keep on increasing the number of such qualities which you are removing, and over a period of time you will find that your detachment has reached very high levels. And as the detachment increases, the vrittis are controlled. The fluctuations of the mind get controlled. The mind comes under control. There is another higher level of detachment. There is another higher level of renunciation. Patanjali talks about it in the 16th Sutra. Here he says, this detachment is not at the gross level, is not at the level of objects, is not at the level of the mind. This goes beyond that. He says Prakriti by itself is made up of number of gunas. As we all know, these gunas are sattva, rajas and tamas. Sattva is formlessness. There is lack of form in certain portions of the Prakriti. The other is form, tamas. There is form present in certain portions of Prakriti. That is another quality which Prakriti displays. And the third is change of form. So what is formless becomes a form, what is form becomes a formless. This fluctuations between form, formlessness and change are the three gunas, three qualities of Prakriti. They will always be there. And once when we are able to focus our mind on the Purusha, on the unchanging element in us, once when we have the awareness to understand what is changing around us and what is not changing in us, once we have the ability to understand what is changing in us and what is not changing in us, then we realize the Purusha, then we see the Atma, then we see the soul. So it is only the Purusha, it is only the Atma, it is only the soul which is unchanging, which is fixed, which is constant, where there is no motion, where there is no fluctuation, where there is completely at rest. And this is precisely where we need to focus on. This is precisely where we need to put our mind on. This is precisely what we need to concentrate on. And once when we concentrate on this, then our concentration is moved away from all that is changing. Our concentration is detached from all that is changing. And all that is changing is called Prakriti. All that is changing has got the three gunas, the three qualities of nature. So there is complete dispassion, even from Prakriti, at its basic level, at its core level, at its essential level. So this is the highest form of dispassion. This is the highest form of Vairagya, where one is not at all attached to the gross form, not at all attached to the subtle form, and not at all attached to the minutest form of Prakriti. So Prakriti, whether present as an object, as a material, or whether present as an element of the mind, ahankar or buddhi, whatever form, subtle form, Prakriti is present in, we are not attached to it. We are not attached to any idea. We are not attached to any thought. We are not attached to any concept. We are not attached to any memory. We are not attached to any sanskara. We are not attached to anything from the karmic account. We are not attached to any of the kleshas which are inborn in us, which have been there from birth. There is complete independence, complete freedom from all that is there. So this ultimate form of Vairagya, dispassion, is called Dharma Meg Samadhi. This Dharma Meg Samadhi means that Dharma is the highest quality of existence. Dharma is when a man is full of positive gunas, full of virtues. And Megha means cloud. Megha is the Sanskrit version of cloud. And Samadhi is a state of equilibrium in which the mind reaches the highest state of concentration. So here in Dharma Meg Samadhi, this is the highest form of Samadhi. even higher than Nirvikalp Samadhi, Nirbij Samadhi, where the mind disappears. But in Dharmamek Samadhi, their dispassion, Vairagya, is 100%. There's not even an iota of passion out here because the mind is 100% absent here. So since the mind is 100% absent here, there is no question of the gunas being present. There is no question of sattva, rajas or tamas qualities being present in the mind. And therefore, the dharma makes samadhi, such a person is surrounded by a cloud of virtues. He is drenched in a cloud of virtues. And once when he reaches the state of samadhi, this is the time for Kevalya. This is the moment where a person is ready for complete liberation. This is the time when a person is ready for absolute independence. This is the time for the Purusha to separate out from Prakriti. So when he is separating out from Prakriti, so the three gunas of Sattva, Rajas and Tamas realize that they are no longer playing any role. Their job is over because the Purusha has become independent of them. The Purusha has renounced them. The Purusha has gone beyond them. So they pack up. They close up their performance and they go back in the primordial state of Prakriti and reach a state of equilibrium. So all that the Prakriti had evolved in its various forms of Mahat, Buddhi, Ahankara, Manas, the five Jnanendriyas, the five Karmendriyas, the five Tanmatras, the five Panchmahabhutas, all these evolutes which have come from Prakriti, they roll back, they dissolve back, and they reach the primordial state of Prakriti. And the three gunas, they also roll back. They reach the state of equilibrium. Now, externally, there is no change happening, but internally, there is change. But that change is such a change that the overall state of Prakriti seems to be not changing. The change is only internal. There is no external change. Now, this is the time when the Prakriti becomes unmanifest. This is the time when the Prakriti reaches to its primordial state. This is the time when the Prakriti now exhibits its original qualities of infiniteness, permanency, constant change, but that change is independent of the Purusha because the Purusha has got isolated from Prakriti. That isolation, that loneliness, that separation of the Purusha from the Prakriti is called Kevalya. That is the state where the Purusha becomes liberated, becomes independent, achieves a state of moksha, achieves a state of completeness, achieves a state of highest existence. Now this Purusha, since it has become liberated from Prakriti, it does not again merge into Prakriti. It remains independent and exists alone. So then we essentially have the three entities only present in its original form. They are Ishvara, they are the Purusha, and they are the Prakriti. These three exist. And as we know, this is the state of spiritual existence. The Ishvara is infinite, permanent, eternal, non-changing. The Purusha is infinite, permanent, eternal, and non-changing. And the Prakriti is infinite, permanent, eternal, and changing. So my dear friends, these three, they constitute the spiritual part of existence. They constitute the infinite part of existence. They constitute the permanent part of existence. They are always there, though they behave in the way as I defined them. And it is Prakriti which evolves, and what evolves keeps on changing again. So what evolves is a combination of matter and mind. This combination of matter and mind keeps on constantly changing. The, the fluctuations which happen in the mind are happening because of the world of matter outside, because of the world of objects outside. And the world of matter, the world of objects outside, is perceived by the senses, is perceived by the sense organs, and the knowledge of those objects outside is sent inside. And when they come to the inside, they are experienced, they are sensed, they are noticed, they are registered. When they are sensed, when they are noticed, when they are registered, that is the time they form a vritti. And this vritti, which has been formed, they in turn form the sanskaras and the karma. So that is how life gets formed. Life starts happening, life starts moving. It all starts with the sanskara, it all starts with the vritti. Now when we are able to control the vrittis and bring them to a stop, that is what yoga says, stop, bring a stop. Now here, we no longer are freezing knowledge into memory. We are no longer freezing the outer knowledge into vrittis and sanskaras and karmas. So the cycle of life stops and we reach the highest state of existence where nothing changes now, where everything is stable, where everything is calm, where everything is composed. So yoga is a state of permanency where nothing is changing, where we reach the state of the Purusha, which is not changing. And why the state of the Purusha and why not the state of the Ishvara? We reach the state of the Purusha because we are individual, and Purusha is an individual Atman, is an individual soul. And the universal soul, the Param soul, the Param Purusha is Ishvara. Ishvara does not come through Prakriti. Ishvara comes directly into its existence as a concept, as a tattva. But Purusha as a tattva, as a principle, as a concept, comes through Prakriti. And Prakriti as a principle, as a concept, stays with the presence of Purusha and evolves and creates this whole universe, this whole creation, along with, in conjunction with the Purusha. Therefore, the whole exercise is for the Purusha to become dispassionate about Prakriti. And once that dispassion comes about, then automatically the separation takes place. The conjunction between the Purusha and the Prakriti is broken and they separate out. And if you look at it very, very deeply, very, very insightfully, you will see that our mind is attached to 100 things. When we bring it into concentration, we bring it to one point, one place. And when I bring it to one point, one place, I'm automatically detaching my mind. I'm automatically removing my mind from 99 other places. So concentration and detachment are complementary activities which produce the same result, the overall result of moving in the direction of yoga, the overall result of controlling the fluctuations of the mind, the overall result of bringing a halt to the vrittis. And when we are able with concentration and dispassion to bring these fluctuations to a stop, to a complete halt, that is the time when yoga has happened. That is the time when we have moved in to the Purusha kind of an existence, because now all change has stopped. We have cut off ourselves from all form of change by the powers of concentration and by the power of dispassion. So by abhyas, which is constant practice, and by vairagya, which is cutting yourself off from one color after another till you are in attachment to no color, you are completely detached. so yoga takes place. So these are the two elementary time methods by which the process of cutting apart the Purusha and the Prakriti is practiced as suggested by Patanjali. There is a third method also which Patanjali has suggested, which the yogis that time were not using, but he has suggested to them. And this is a very powerful method. And that is, he has asked them to consider the option of Ishvara Pranidhana. Ishvara Pranidhana means a devotion towards Ishvara, attraction towards Ishvara, commitment towards Ishvara, surrender towards Ishvara. When you do your devotion, surrender, commitment to Ishvara, you find that the vrittis of the mind automatically start stabilizing. And then he suggests a method which is of Om chanting. He says you chant Om, you bring your mind to one place, and that place is the sound of the primordial mystic Om. And once when you practice that, you will find that your body is free from its diseases. You will find that the mind is free from mental health issues. You will find the soul rising in consciousness to higher and higher levels. So both in terms of body, mind and spirit, Om chanting takes you to higher and higher levels. And by this method, one can completely free oneself from all vrittis. And through this method, one can in a very friendly way, in a very easy way, free oneself from all the sanskaras. And that is the beauty of Patanjali. These three methods are fantastic methods by which we can bring a halt to all our vrittis, and we can bring a halt to all our karmic account, and we can bring a halt to all the rajas and tamas which is getting formed in us, and we can generate sattva, because with Ishvara Pranidhana, with Om chanting, there is a constant input of sattvic vrittis, there is a constant input of sattva. So this automatically reduces the rajas and tamas in us, and we reach higher and higher levels of existence. We reach higher and higher levels of sattva. And as our levels of sattva keep on increasing, then we find the buddhi is full of sattva. And when buddhi becomes full of sattva, and when even the chitta, comprising of the buddhi, the ahankar and the manas, becomes full of sattva, then it behaves in a way which is identical to the Purusha. And that is the time when Purusha disengages from the chitta. Because earlier the chitta was full of drama, full of action, arising because of rajas and tamas. It was full of changing images. It was like watching a movie which the Purusha was enjoying seeing. But now with the rajas no longer there, the movie is not moving. And now with the tamas no longer there, the forms are no longer there, the images are no longer there. So all that you are left with is nothing, the formless. And that is what the Purush also is. So now the Purush starts seeing itself in itself. The Purush now becomes a sort of, you can say, in a state of Atma Sakshatkar, in a state of self-realization, in a self of Atma realization. And that is precisely what is the goal of yoga, so that we keep on seeing the change happening around us. We become independent of all the change that is happening around us with practice of concentration, with practice of vairagya, and we become free. And when we become free, we become the free Purusha, we become the liberated Purusha. That is what we truly are. Our real identity is of the Purusha. Our real identity is not of Prakriti. We entity, we are a permanent entity, and we need to understand that. And the moment we understand that, the moment we realize that, we find freedom, we find liberation, we find independence, we find a life which is fantastic, of a new dimension altogether. And that is the goal of human life. That is a life which is full of bliss. That is a life which is full of knowledge. That is a life which is full of power. And that is what each human being should achieve. That because that is what we truly are. We have got covered by impurities. We have got covered by rajas and tamas. And that is what is the cause of all our illness. That is the cause of all our dukkha. That is the cause of all our shortcomings. So, my dear friends, let us clean it up. Let us practice controlling the vrittis. Let us do concentration practice. Let us do dispassion, vairagya practice. Let us do Ishwar Panidhana and reach the highest and the highest states of human existence possible. Thank you so much. God bless each one of you. May you receive permanent happiness through these talks, and may you pass this knowledge, this ancient knowledge of India, this ancient wisdom of India, this ancient everlasting happiness-giving knowledge of Patanjali, of yoga, to your family members. Make them permanently happy. Make the family of your society completely happy. Make the family of all your countrymen completely happy, and make the family of all people of this world also at peace and permanent happiness. So be it, in full faith. God bless each one of you. Thank you for being here and listening to this talk. May all your dreams and desires come true with the grace of the Ishvara. Thank you, thank you, thank you.